The transatlantic slave trade is perhaps the darkest chapter in the history of the black race, if not all of mankind. It was a singular and towering evil that rampaged abroad in all its ugliness for more than 300 years before men and women of conscience, nobility of spirit, and uncommon courage were able to conquer it at great cost in blood, sweat, tears, and treasure. For over 3 centuries, African men, women, and children were captured and led away in chains and shackles from the motherland, shattered, bowed, and broken in body and in many, though not in all cases, in spirit. Through various doors and corridors of no return scattered along the West African coastline, in places like Gori Island in Senegal, Elmina Castle in Ghana, and Badagry and Calabar in Nigeria, they were headed like cattle onto slave ships. These hapless men and women, some of them princes and princesses and mighty warriors who represented the flower of African youth, virility, and genius, as the slave merchants were careful not to choose the very old, the sick, the handicapped, or the mentally challenged, were torn not just from the familiar sights, sounds, smells, and essence of the African homelands, but also from the aura of the ancestral presence which traditional African society held so dear, as well as their culture and religion. Before embarking on the horror and trauma of the infamous Middle Passage, the slaves were sorted out and separated in such a way that no 2 or more persons who shared an ethnic or linguistic affinity, say Yorubas, Efoks, or Ashantis for example, were allowed to come in close proximity in order to prevent a closing of ranks against the slave masters, and also to hasten the process of detaching each slave from his culture and identity as represented by his mother tongue. In the dark, damp, and stinking holds of slave ships, they were packed and piled horizontally on top of one another like sardines to make for maximum use of available space and to accommodate as many slaves as possible, because the slave traders knew that in such extreme conditions, many of the slaves would surely die of suffocation and exhaustion. The lucky ones were those who seized the opportunity to take their own lives en route, unable to endure the unspeakable horror that unfolded before their disbelieving eyes. In the latter stages of the slave trade, when nations like Great Britain abolished the inhuman trade and began patrolling their territorial waters with warships to enforce compliance, untold numbers of slaves were cast into the sea to fool the British and escape arrest. The weight of their shackles prevented their bodies from floating back to the ocean's surface, and so they were left to the mercy of sharks, and their shackled bones lay on the ocean floor, silent witnesses to man's utter depravity and inhumanity to his fellow man. But their unbound spirits have long since escaped into immortality, into the memories of those who survived the terrible voyage through the depths of hell. At market stalls and auction sales in notorious coastal slave ports like Annapolis in Maryland, USA, the survivors were sold to various farmers and plantation owners who gave them Caucasian names whose meanings had little or no significance compared to the profundity and wisdom of African names.
Your name is Toby. I want to hear you say it. Your name is Toby. You're going to learn to say your name. Let me hear you say it. What's your name?
Kunta Kinte.
When the master gives you something, you take it. He gave you a name. It's a nice name. It's Toby. And it's going to be yours till the day you die. I want to hear you say your name. Your name is Toby. What's your name?
Kunta.
What's your name?
Toby.
Hi. Say it again. Say it louder so they all can hear you. What's your name?
Toby.
And branded their backs with red-hot irons to confirm their ownership. In the scorching plantations of America's deep south, they toiled from dawn to dusk, their backs bent under the slave master's whip, given just enough food, shelter, and clothing to keep them alive, and sentenced to a lifetime without hope. Those who tried to escape were punished in the most dreadful way possible, such as castration or chopping off of a hand or foot. In their hearts, however, sprang forth the most beautiful of songs, songs of lamentation at their pitiable conditions, songs of longing for their lost homelands and loved ones, but also songs of hope for freedom and dignity, if not in this life, then in the hereafter. These Negro spirituals, as they later came to be known, testify to the resilience and unquenchable fire of faith that has come to characterize the journey of the African Americans, descendants of slaves, through the vicissitudes of life in America, from the abolitionist movement and the American Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation and the backlash of disgruntled Southern whites who tried to turn back the tide of freedom by forming white supremacist movements like the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, and blatant lynching of blacks, to the gauntlet of racist hatred, prejudice, and discrimination that black Americans had to run through on a daily basis, to the struggle for civil rights and equality, the emergence of charismatic leaders like Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and others who crystallized the civil rights movement and its battle against segregation and unequal opportunity, to the landmark legislations that crowned their efforts with relative success, even to the audacious presidential campaigns of black politicians like the Reverend Jesse Jackson in 1988 and Senator Barack Obama today.
I'd grown up without a sense of roots. My father was black, he was from Kenya, he had left when I was 2. My mother was white and she was from Kansas, and I'd moved with her to Indonesia and then back to Hawaii, and in many ways I didn't know where I came from. So I was drawn to the belief that you could sustain a spiritual, emotional, and cultural identity. And I understood the Zionist idea, the homeland at the center of our story.
That a people so brutalized and traumatized over such a long time not only survived, but thrived and even went on to stamp their unique identity on the character of the American nation and the world at large, especially in the area of sports, the arts, entertainment, civic and political life, is a testimony to the strength of the human spirit and ranks among the greatest miracles of all time. Today, that miracle has come full circle. Those whose ancestors were taken through the doors and corridors of no return have returned, not in stinking slave ships, but in luxurious airliners and unbound, both in body and spirit, to answer the call of the motherland. Among those who came back recently on a symbolic return to the motherland was a group of African-American business and civic leaders and artists, among whom were past and present U.S. mayors and the renowned singer Marlon Jackson of the famous musical family, the Jackson 5. As part of the trip to Nigeria, which was organized under the auspices of the Motherland Beckons initiative of the management of the Lacampine Beach Resort, the American delegation visited the ancient town of Badagry in Lagos State, which was the site of one of the most notorious traffic routes and transit points of the transatlantic slave trade, of which a number of relics still remain. Led by cultural enthusiast Wanle Akimboboye, Motherland Beckons is aimed at forging closer ties between Africans on the continent and their brethren in the diaspora, using the platforms of culture, tourism and business. On arrival at Badagry, the group bowed their heads in prayer, thanking God for the opportunity to reconnect with their ancestral roots, before proceeding along Badagry's own corridor of no return, pausing to reflect on the haunting relics along the way. At a point during the trip, Wanle Akimboboye conducted a symbolic welcoming ceremony for the visitors, during which each of them gave an emotional and sometimes tearful personal insight into what their ancestors went through and what their return to the motherland meant to them.
Everybody across the globe should visit this to understand what took place and to understand, meaning the non-Africans, non-African Americans, to understand what their people did. Because I'm sure there's some pain. I'm sure there's some pain in those for what their people did. And to look back and to feel it, to walk the path that they walked. And I can't feel the pain they felt because I know deep in my heart that there is a return for me, but there's no return for them. So it hurts. It really hurts because I can't understand how you could do this to a human being.
Welcome back, brother. Welcome back. Motherland Beckons. It's your home. And we're giving it back. Like you said, yes, they cannot return, but you can return. And you have returned. Bring the rest of them back. Let's come back. And a lot of us, like Brother Gary Luster will say, that have left on slave ships, should come back on airships and add to the development and growth of the continent. I welcome you. Thank you.
I'm a two-time mayor, City of District Heights, Maryland. I'm also the first African American mayor in the City of District Heights. I've been involved in a lot of civic duties and responsibilities. I've been to Africa about 20 times. I've been to Nigeria 15 of those times. I've had an opportunity to go to Ghana, Goree Island. And let me say this, you know, each time that I've gone to those places where the slave trade was initiated, I thought I could get rid of the pain. When I went to Goree, I went to the door of no return, and I thought the pain was gone. When I went to Ghana, I went to Elmina Castle, and I thought the pain was gone. But today, I found out that there's still more pain there. And when I found out what happened here at Badagry, and what I knew about as far as what went on in the Middle Passage, when some of those slaves were thrown overboard and not given a decent burial, no one said the Lord's Prayer, those souls are restless. And what I think we need to do as African Americans is to find out what it's going to take for us to get rid of the pain. And I want to thank Juan Lee and the Motherland Beckons organization for putting this program on and the wonderful things that I believe that Motherland Beckons is going to do for all of us in the very near future. Thank you.
Welcome home, brother. Welcome home. How do you feel, sir?
Well, I understand what happened, but I want to be the Lone Ranger and share with you that none of our people who came here that made this work were slaves. Let me share with you why. You can't enslave a man. You can enslave a boy. I know that some died back there, and it was horrendous for what they did, but they died back there knowing their culture, knowing their name, knowing who God was, knowing their tribe. They were not slaves, they were captured. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference between being captured and being enslaved. My problem is when they took the journey over to North America. They were the slaves. You saw, my brother, that they were captured, and some African partaked in that. But even though we captured them, you still captured a warrior, a man who had the knowledge of himself. Sooner or later, if you capture a man, he will get away. But when you capture a boy, he has no knowledge of himself. And to illustrate that, if you've only been to America and been to a circus, let me tell you something. That line that you see jumping through the hoop is a slave. The real life in Africa, you can never approach him. Never could you approach him. So I want you to know right now, beyond a doubt, yes, every race of people have had slave enslavement, but they were able to marry into your family, to your life, to your culture. But under European slavery, it was the most heinous that we have. Even today in America, we still suffer from institutional slavery. We do. And the biggest problem we have today is that we don't realize that most of us as the Negroes don't realize that. If I ask you right now, where did the Mexican come from? You say Mexico. A Chinaman, China. Africa. But where did the Negro come from? You have to pause. Because those no such thing as Negro land. We suffer an identity crisis today in 2008. So let me share with you, although I found the pain, but at the same time I know that the life that they took here, those guys were not slave brothers and sisters, they were not slave. Yeah, they was mistreated, abused, accused, refused, begged, burned, and lynched. Yes, it was. But they knew who God was. They knew their family background. They knew their history. They knew their culture. The ones that took the trip over the side didn't. They were slaves.
Welcome back, sir. Welcome back. Motherland has beckoned to you, and I'm glad you heeded the call. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Relieve the pain, relieve the anger, and be part of home. This is your home.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to say that I feel the pain. Walking down that sandy, hot path with the Badagry sun against my head, thirsting for water, which I knew nothing about, but I wanted the water. And to walk up here to the sandy beaches, not knowing exactly where I was going, when I was going, and seeing the ships, I felt more pain. But as history has it, We made it across. We were enslaved. We left freedom for slavery, and we're back today. We'll work hard with the African people, especially Nigerians and the Badagry community, to do whatever we can to make it a little more simpler, a little easier for all of us. Thank you.
Motherland Beckons call. Thank you.
Well, being a female, being a woman, I have a nurturing spirit, the mother instinct, the things like that. I kept feeling coming through what I would call an uncommon spirit, things that were uncommon to me, and I'm sure to the slaves in general, the captured in general, and but the women in particular. The uncommon things like the weight of the heavy shackles on the neck and the hand and the ankles. That's uncommon if you've never been in shackle before. The weight must have been tremendous. The walk had to be tiresome and hot. But it's not so much the heat. The heat was common in Africa. That wasn't uncommon. It was the shackles. What was uncommon was the burying of the living, simply because they were too weak to continue. That's uncommon. You know, I could feel the hurt, especially for the one who may have been shackled directly to that particular person, because they too was trying to help them to make the walk, to keep them strong, to nurture them, to encourage them that we can do this. So that was uncommon to have to experience that. And the look on the children's face that were probably captured, not knowing where they were going, not knowing what was going to happen. That's uncommon to children who are happily playing, even as prisoners of war, so to speak, where they captured entire villages of people. Children were still allowed to play. They weren't shackled, led astray. That's an uncommon feeling to a child. As I walked, I felt bad, but I started to feel a strength come about me, a spirit of strength that I think is common within the African race, and I'm talking about myself in particular, where you are able to endure and become determined that come what may, you will see it through. And I'd like to think that I'm on the other side of that spirit of coming through, have made a way. I have survived through all the negative things that our generations before us have, and have become strong enough as a people to be able to return to Africa from whence I came. I feel stronger. I was weak at first. I was hurt. I was very sad through that time walk. But I got midway, and then I became determined that I would make it. And as a people, we will.
Welcome back home, sister.
I felt sad at first, but then I started feeling the pride of my ancestors. I started feeling like what they must have felt like as they were coming across from that water, walking across the sand, knowing that they might not see their land again, their village again, the home again that they knew. Knowing that they walked with pride, that they were warriors. Knowing that they were going away from their families, they were going away from what they knew to be home, knowing that they were warriors and that they were willing to survive, that they would not be beaten down and they would not be trampled upon, and they would not be beaten. I felt the pride. I wanted to walk with my head high like I knew what they did with their shackles on, and their shackles around their neck and their ankles and their wrist. You know, and they were being made to feel like they were nothing, but I'm sure they were proud. They walked with pride. They did not let that stop them from holding their dignity. I felt the spirit of them come through when I thought about them having still hold to that pride, as they may have seen their wives and their relatives buried alive in the sand, with no grave, with no one there to comfort them, with not being able to comfort them themselves. I felt the pride of them knowing that they did survive. They survived, and they allowed me to survive. Those were the grandfathers of my great-grandfathers, the grandmothers of my great-grandmothers that made that journey, that saw this world, saw this ocean, saw it as the last thing that they saw. The last thing that they would remember of home, the thing that they had to take with them, that they had to hold on to. So, right now, I feel the sadness, but I also feel the pride, knowing that they did survive along the way. I am a descendant of their pride, that I have accomplished things in a land where they started with nothing. They started without their culture, without their religion, without their language, without their family. They survived, and because I am here, and the Motherland Beckons me to come back home, and I'm proud to be here, and I feel that pride.
No words. No words. You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Carry on the fight from here on.
I will.
Great. How do you feel, sir?
Well, actually, I feel quite full. I feel full, not full of anger, but full, or as a representative of my own family, as the first of my family on my mother or father's side to come to Africa, to have this great connect that sort of embodies what Motherland Beckons is all about. But to have the great cultural, religious, natural connect in a manner of which it were to be like the ground that we stand on now would be essentially to the Christians Calvary, the effort where the whole effort of the Christian faith was thrust into being is happening for us right here. And to be a witness, to be evidentiary, to give recall and respect to our foreparents who were torn away, and even our African brothers and sisters who were torn away from one another, who grew each other 400 years later as broken people. We are broken in America as it relates to awareness and appreciation of our brothers and sisters here where we live in Africa. Those that are in Africa, with the great admiration for their brothers and appreciation for them in the diaspora, are broken up with doubt, fear, and worry. And the Motherland Beckons effort will bind us together. And we merge in these talents and abilities and spirits. And it has been the spirit of us for 400 years through across denominational lines, the Muslim faith, the very many Yoruba faith and those religions here in Africa that we respect and witness, as well as the Christian faith that did not belong to the Africans that left these shores in chains. But we find ourselves through that same spirit. It's a determined spirit that allows the beauty, the dignity, the character, and the sameness. Many heads and keen features and strong bodies, but a determined spirit to bring us back together, bind us together, because it is evident that African people bound together in Africa and the diaspora with the talents and abilities that we have, we can take ourselves to a far greater level. And that is what we celebrate. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, my brother.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Motherland Beckons.
Well, let me thank Juan Lee, for Motherland Beckons, heed the call. And for my dear brother here, for I have a bit of a different twist. As I walk that trail, I sort of understand, because you see, as a college professor, as one with a law background, as a police chief, as an undercover narcotics officer, as a full-time mayor, as a General Motors executive, as the chairman of the World Conference of Mayors, I appreciate the struggle. I now know where I get my strength from. Although bent, bowed, broken as they were taken, I come back unbent, unbowed, and not broken. I don't apologize that I was destroyed by what took place here with my ancestors. But in the name of the spirit and in the name of the mind, I will never bend, I will never be broken, and I will never be enslaved. Never again will you do what you did on the shores of Badagry, what you did at Gold Island, what you did in Senegal, what you did in Ghana. Never again. Never again. Never. We refuse to be taken, broken, bent, for we have learned as we stand on these shores what our experience has been, and we know what it will be. Thanks, praises to God and Allah. We have come home, my brothers and sisters. The journey has been complete. It is our responsibility, through Motherland Beckons, to heed the call, spread the message, and to tell others. No, I will never, ever give up. No, you will never break me. No, I will never bow. No, I will never be bent. As I stand on the shores of my forefathers, thank God for you. Because of you, I am.
Welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome home, brother.
The visitors were later ushered into the palace of the traditional ruler of Badagry Kingdom, Oba Akran III, by cultural performers. Receiving the American visitors in his palace, Oba Akran III expressed his delight at the return of the African Americans. He hoped that the visit will open the floodgate for more and more Americans of African descent to seek their ancestral roots, and called for concrete investments by all stakeholders towards the development of the African continent, Nigeria and Badagry in particular. The visitors later joined a traditional troupe in a brief performance. Along with Badagry, another notorious site during the transatlantic slave trade was Calabar and its environs in Cross River State. In the communities that lay on the banks of its many rivers, creeks and lakes, countless slaves were snatched and sold into slavery, the transit point, or point of no return, so to say, being the Calabar port. One of the monuments to this important era in the history of Nigeria and Africa is the National Museum in Calabar, the Cross River State capital. Also known as the Old Residency, the edifice, which was built of prefabricated wood in Britain before being transported to Calabar in the early 16th century, has undergone many metamorphoses in its long history. Since 1959, when it became the property of the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments, it has housed a number of relics, artifacts, photographs, monograms, and other illustrations chronicling the history of Nigeria from the pre-colonial traditional societies and their early contact with the Portuguese and other Europeans through slavery, colonialism, political independence, and the beginning down to the present day.